My dad admitted he put my name on a loan without my permission. When I said no, he told me, "You owe me your life." The next day, I filed a fraud report and locked every account he had access to. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd report their own father to the police. Growing up, he was my hero, the guy who worked double shifts to keep food on the table, who taught me how to throw a baseball, who showed up to every single one of my high school games, even when he was exhausted. But somewhere along the way, the man I knew disappeared, and what remained was someone I barely recognized. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening. I'd stopped by his apartment after work, something I did maybe once a week to check in on him. He'd been struggling since Mom passed away 3 years ago, and I tried to be there when I could. He was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, and the look on his face told me something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. He started off casual, asking about work and whether I was still seeing the woman I'd mentioned last month. I told him things were going well, that I was actually thinking about proposing soon. That's when his expression shifted. He pushed one of the papers across the table toward me and explained that he needed to talk about something important. My stomach dropped when I saw what it was, a loan statement with my name on it. $47,000. The address listed was his apartment, but my name was right there as the primary borrower. I asked him what this was, my voice already rising, and he had the audacity to look irritated that I was upset. He explained, in that matter-of-fact tone he used when he didn't want to be questioned, that he'd taken out the loan 6 months ago. He needed it to pay off some debts and cover expenses after he'd lost his job. He'd used my information because his credit was shot, and he figured I wouldn't mind since we were family. He actually said those words, figured I wouldn't mind. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I asked him how he even got my information, and he waved his hand dismissively, saying he'd kept copies of my documents from when I'd applied for college years ago. Social security number, date of birth, everything he needed. He'd been holding on to them all this time. The worst part was how he justified it. He told me I was overreacting, that this was what family did for each other. Then he hit me with the line that still makes my blood boil. He said I owed him my life. He'd raised me, fed me, clothed me, and this was the least I could do to pay him back. As if love and support were transactions that needed to be settled with compound interest. I told him absolutely not. I explained that what he'd done was identity theft and fraud, and that I wasn't going to let this stand. He laughed, actually laughed, and said I wouldn't do anything because deep down I knew he was right. He said I'd always been soft, that I didn't have the backbone to go against my own father. I left without another word. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night researching identity theft, fraud reporting, and what my options were. The more I read, the angrier I became. This wasn't just a desperate mistake. This was calculated. He'd planned this, executed it, and expected me to just roll over and accept it. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had things to do, and they couldn't wait. My first stop was the police station, where I filed a formal fraud report. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but warned me that pressing charges against a family member could get complicated. I told him I understood and that I wanted to proceed anyway. From there, I went to my bank. I explained the situation to the branch manager and requested that all my accounts be locked down with additional security measures. I changed every password, set up two-factor authentication, and explicitly stated that my father was not authorized to access anything related to my finances. The manager made notes in my file and assured me they'd flag any suspicious activity. Next, I pulled my credit report. Seeing that loan listed there, dragging down my score, made me want to throw my laptop across the room. I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus, attaching copies of the police report and explaining that I had not authorized this loan. They told me the investigation could take weeks, but at least the process was started. I also contacted the lending company directly. Getting through to an actual person took nearly an hour of navigating automated menus, but eventually I reached someone who could help. I explained that the loan in my name was fraudulent and that I'd filed a police report. The representative put me on hold, came back, and confirmed they'd freeze the account pending investigation. They'd need documentation, which I promised to send immediately. By the time I finished, it was mid-afternoon, and I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. I'd done what needed to be done. My father had gambled that I wouldn't have the guts to stand up to him, and he'd lost. He called that evening. I almost didn't answer, but I figured I might as well get it over with. The moment I picked up, he started yelling. Someone from the lending company had contacted him about the fraud investigation, and he was furious. He demanded to know what I'd done, his voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I calmly explained exactly what I'd done, filed a police report, locked down my accounts, disputed the fraudulent loan, and notified the lender. I told him that what he'd done was illegal and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just because we shared DNA. He went silent for a moment, and then his tone changed. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, desperation. He started pleading, saying he'd lose everything if I went through with this. He claimed he'd go to jail, that he'd be homeless, that I was destroying his life over money. I reminded him that he'd had no problem destroying my credit, my financial security, and my trust. I told him that if he'd come to me honestly and asked for help, we could have figured something out together. Instead, he'd stolen from me and expected gratitude for it. He switched tactics again, trying guilt. He brought up Mom, saying she'd be ashamed of how I was treating him. He said she'd raised me better than this, that she'd expect me to take care of him now that she was gone. That one almost broke me, but I held firm. I told him Mom would have been horrified by what he'd done, and that using her memory to manipulate me was a new low even for him. The call ended with him telling me I was dead to him, that I'd regret this for the rest of my life. Then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and grief. Part of me had died in that moment, the part that still believed my father was a good man who'd just made a mistake. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The police investigation moved slowly, but they confirmed they were treating it as a serious case. The credit bureaus removed the fraudulent loan from my report, which helped, though the damage to my score would take time to fully repair. The lending company pursued legal action against my father for fraud, and I cooperated fully with their investigation. My extended family found out, of course. Word spread fast, and suddenly my phone was full of messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to. Most of them were angry with me, saying I should have handled this privately, that airing family problems like this was shameful. A few understood, but they were in the minority. My uncle, Dad's older brother, called me a few days after everything went public. He lectured me for 20 minutes about family loyalty and how I was making a mistake I couldn't take back. I let him finish, then asked if he knew that Dad had stolen nearly $50,000 using my identity. The silence on the other end was telling. He mumbled something about being sure there was a misunderstanding and hung up. The only person who truly supported me was my girlfriend. When I told her everything, she was furious on my behalf. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself, that what my father had done was unforgivable. She also pointed out something I hadn't fully considered. If I'd let this slide, what would have stopped him from doing it again? Or doing it to someone else? That thought haunted me. My father had shown no remorse, only anger at being caught. If I'd covered for him, paid off the loan, and pretended nothing happened, he would have learned that he could get away with it. And the next time, it might have been worse. The legal process dragged on for months. My father hired a lawyer, though I had no idea how he afforded one given his financial situation. There were depositions, court dates, and endless documentation. Through it all, he maintained that he'd done nothing wrong, that I was the one tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. The turning point came when the prosecution presented evidence that this wasn't his first offense. Apparently, he'd done something similar to a former coworker years ago, though that person hadn't pressed charges. The pattern of behavior made it clear this wasn't a desperate one-time mistake. It was who he'd become. The judge wasn't sympathetic. My father was convicted of identity theft and fraud. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though with good behavior, he'd likely serve less. He was also ordered to pay restitution, though I had no illusions about ever seeing that money. The day of the sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched as they led him away. He looked at me once, and the hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. This man who'd raised me, who'd been my hero, now saw me as his greatest enemy. I felt nothing but a hollow sadness. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. My credit score slowly recovered. My relationship with my girlfriend grew stronger, and I eventually proposed like I'd planned. She said yes, and we started planning a future together. But there was always this shadow hanging over everything, the knowledge that I'd sent my own father to prison. People asked me if I regretted it. Family members who'd initially condemned me started reaching out with variations of the same question. Was it worth it? Did I really need to go that far? Couldn't I have found another way? My answer was always the same. What he did was wrong, and there had to be consequences. If I'd let it slide, I would have been telling him, and myself, that my boundaries meant nothing, that family could abuse and exploit me without repercussions. I refused to live that way. About a year after everything started, my father was released early for good behavior. I heard about it through my uncle, who suggested that maybe now we could reconcile. I told him I wasn't interested. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Dad tried to contact me a few times after his release. Emails, mostly, and one letter sent to my apartment. He never apologized. Instead, he continued to insist that I'd overreacted, that I'd ruined his life over nothing. He painted himself as the victim, betrayed by an ungrateful son who'd forgotten everything he'd done for me. I never responded. What was there to say? He'd shown me exactly who he was, and I'd believed him. The man I'd loved and admired was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. In his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of tremendous selfishness and cruelty. The hardest part wasn't the anger or the betrayal. It was the grief. I grieved for the father I'd lost, for the relationship we'd never have again, for the family that had fractured beyond repair. I grieved for the version of my life where this had never happened, where my dad was someone I could trust and respect. But I didn't regret what I'd done. When I looked at my girlfriend, now my fiancée, I knew I'd made the right choice. When I checked my credit report and saw my score climbing back up, I knew I'd made the right choice. When I thought about the life we were building together, free from the toxicity and manipulation, I knew I'd made the right choice. My father had told me I owed him my life. He was wrong. I owed him nothing but the truth, and the truth was that what he'd done was criminal. He'd counted on my love and loyalty to shield him from the consequences of his actions. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Loyalty doesn't mean becoming an accomplice to fraud. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. What if I just paid off the loan and cut contact quietly? What if I tried to work something out with him privately? But those hypotheticals don't matter. I made my choice based on who I wanted to be, not who he wanted me to be. The last time I saw my father was at a grocery store, about 6 months after his release. We locked eyes across the produce section, and for a moment I thought he might approach me. Instead, he turned and walked away, and I let him go. There was nothing left to say. I'm getting married next month. My father won't be there, and I'm okay with that. The people who will be there are the ones who've supported me, who've respected my boundaries, who've shown me what healthy relationships actually look like. That's the family that matters. Looking back, I realized that the moment my father put my name on that loan without permission, he made a choice. He chose to value money over integrity, convenience over honesty, and his own needs over my well-being. My choice, to hold him accountable, was simply a response to his. I didn't create this situation. I just refused to pretend it wasn't happening. People still tell me I should forgive him, that he's my father and family is forever. But forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, and family isn't an excuse for abuse. I've forgiven him in the sense that I've let go of the anger and moved on with my life. But that doesn't mean I owe him a relationship, and it certainly doesn't mean I regret protecting myself. My father taught me a lot over the years. He taught me how to work hard, how to be responsible, how to show up for the people I care about. But in the end, he taught me something even more valuable. He taught me that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do. He taught me that protecting yourself isn't selfish, even when people try to convince you otherwise. And he taught me that I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. I don't know what his life looks like now, and I don't ask. I hope he's gotten help, that he's figured out whatever led him down this path. But that's his journey, not mine. My journey is about building a life with someone who respects me, about creating a family based on trust and mutual support, about being the kind of person who stands up for what's right even when it's painful. The story people expected was one where I'd backed down, where family loyalty won out, where I sacrificed myself to protect him. But that's not the story I wanted to tell. This is the story of how I chose myself, how I refused to be a victim, how I learned that some debts can never be repaid and shouldn't be owed in the first place. My name is on a lot of things now, a mortgage with my fiancé, insurance policies, investment accounts. But every single one of them is something I chose, something I authorized, something that represents the life I'm building on my own terms. And that makes all the difference. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.